Hey everybody, welcome back to Black Lotus. I am Damian Gray with my sidekick as always, Ralph Torlucci, and today we are going to be talking about demonic possessions and also spiritual possessions as well. But before we get into that, let's introduce everybody. We have
Wild Trees has joined the party, everybody.
Wild
Give him
Trees
a
is here.
big round of applause and a warm
Yay!
Black Lotus Productions welcome.
So we have Keith Blanchard from Center of Light Radio and TV, and then we also have Michael Roser from DarkHour Paranormal, and we have our resident scientist who keeps us all sane, Wild Trees. And we also have a special guest with us tonight. We have Billy on with us, who has experienced a possession himself. So, guys, how's it going? How y'all doing?
Fantastic, mate. Thanks for asking. And how
Wait,
about
I
you
just
guys?
got out of the shower like 2 seconds ago.
Yeah,
feeling great.
we were kind of wondering, oh, where's Wild? What's going on? But I think the first thing I want to do is I want to turn this over to Billy because he has a pretty interesting story where he was actually possessed at one point. Billy, can you tell us about that?
Well, like I told you, it all started. I was studying up on some black art stuff, things I've been doing my whole life. And the then wife looked at me and said, I looked up at her and my eyes were just clear white and started talking in something she couldn't understand. The last thing she said that made sense was I looked at her normally and told her to get out.
Hmm.
She ran next door to my family. They came over. I had screwed the house up, broke windows, tore a door off that's like 100 plus pounds out in the yard. And then they went to approach me. I picked up this big pipe and they told me no. And I took off running. They called the cops. And then from here is what I was shown is they called in multiple sheriff's deputies. The distance I covered in 20 miles in less than 15 minutes. They showed me jumping over the top of cars, bailing through cops. It took them a while. They finally cornered me and they just could not take me down. Tasers, anything else, nothing worked. My mom said I only stopped when she yelled out, God, he gave him to me. Devil, you can't have him. Said I slumped over and fell down. Through it all, apparently, I'm talking in a language that nobody can understand, including the doctors, which means no Latin. Um, when I got to the hospital, you think things are over. They got worse. They did the blood test, everything else. They couldn't find nothing. Nobody has an explanation for it. To this day, you cannot find a record of it. Nobody there knows anything about it, can't find anything that happened that night. So I
That's
can't find
that's
the information.
very strange that it just all ended up just missing.
Yeah.
Well, if you know Louisiana, it's predominantly Catholic. And the
Oh,
Catholic
Louisiana.
Church does not like to cover such things. They don't
Hmm.
really want it out there much.
Well, and we were talking earlier that about that, and that the majority of uh, possession instances tend to happen with Catholics. And you were raised Catholic, right, Billy?
No, I was raised Baptist.
Oh, you were.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Huh.
Where in Louisiana are you from, my friend?
Right now I'm in Tickfall. At that time it was St. Francisville.
I'm from Houma.
Cool.
Not so cool. Yeah, I love Houma. Homa's great, but yeah, I'm just jacking around. That's all I want to know. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, I lived in New Orleans for a long time, and so yeah, I know how the how the Catholics are there, definitely.
Well, how did this end for you, Billy? How did it come to pass that you came back to a baseline, and how long were you admitted to the hospital for, or went through this ordeal afterwards?
Well, it threatened my mom. And at that point, like I tell people, I could see everything happening. I just couldn't do nothing about it. And when it threatened her, we went to fight on what you would call, I guess, a spiritual level. And I won. I ended up about a week in a mental ward, and there was no explanation. All they could think was it had to be some drug we don't know exist.
And that being said, I want to ask you, I know this is obviously a personal question, but it's something that people are going to at least have knocking around in their minds. Do you have any history of hard drug use or anything that might have influenced you chemically at that time or outside of yourself that was not necessarily in the realm of spirituality?
And see, that's the big thing. No, I don't even take pain pills from the doctor, not unless I have no other choice.
Good. Thank you for clearing that up, because believe me, that'll be something that needs a little bit of clarity moving forward with this. So
It's always
please
the first
continue
question.
on. Yeah, well, I
that's
mean, it's
always
a
the
good
first
question. Yeah.
Also, Billy, I like to let you know, at least from my standpoint, if I ask questions, one, it's definitely not because I don't believe you. It's because I'm curious, serious, honestly, sincerely curious to know what it was like to be you, which I'm going to ask questions as time goes by, what it was like to be you when this was occurring, how much were you conscious of it. The reason I say this in prep is because as a spiritualist, raised Catholic in South Louisiana, I was attacked many, many times with possessed. That's in quotes. But attacked with the attempt to be possessed many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
But it was later in life that I gained the spiritual endowment, the spiritual muscles to kick their ass, so to speak. But when I was Catholic growing up in South Louisiana, I would wake up in cold sweats in the middle of the night. And this was not dream experiences. This is something completely different. But now when these things occur, because of the knowledge base that I have, when something goes down, it's like, bro, did you seriously just come upon me? I'm about to blast you with a ball of light and you're going to go back to your mama crying, kind of thing. But my questions to you, if I ask any, sir, is truly out of a curiosity of knowing what it was like to be you.
You should see some of the things priests have asked me. You can't get worse than them.
How is that? How is that? What have you been confronted with?
Oh, you had to be a devil worshiper. You were useless. Family ties, lineage, heritage. It was all forced on you due to the 70-year curse. Just a big line of mess. And then
Yeah.
don't talk about it. Don't tell nobody. Don't say this. Don't say that. And you're not allowed to. And it's like, whatever.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, you think that the reason it happened to you in the first place is because you were delving into the dark arts. I find it interesting that a lot of people who claim possession have that issue. They're dealing with spiritual stuff that they don't really understand and don't know how to protect themselves. So, guys, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a question. Well, first of all, it's very nice to meet you, Billy. Thank you for being on. And well, what I want to say is your story. I mean, it fits a pattern. Whenever you hear about possession, it seems to follow your story as well. So my questions. I had two questions. One is, what made you start pursuing the dark arts, like dark magic? And then if you could give us some detail about what type of magic you were practicing or learning before this happened.
Well, I went on, I guess, what you call a spiritual journey. I started studying different religions, different followings, different ideas. And when I did one, I did it wholeheartedly. And the one I was supposed to be in was a Wiccan. And
Okay.
it was on the curses and stuff like that. And like he said, not knowing much, and you just begin, you don't protect yourself and mess with things you probably should not be messing with.
And I think that there's a differentiation here in terms of ancient spiritual practices and perhaps the energies that they were connecting with, and what we know today as the energies that cause demonic possessions. And I believe that there's a differentiating line because one is sort of embodied and described by religion, which is more or less what we have today, whereas in the past it was a much more natural part of their culture and philosophy and theology that these particular spirits would exist. Now the question really begs an answer here. Are these energies that are coming in and influencing people, are they actually demonic entities the way that Christianity and Catholicism and some of these other modalities kind of tout, or are they actually ancient deities that have been working with humanity for a very long time, and we've lost our way in terms of understanding what those entities need in terms of having a symbiotic relationship or synergistic relationship, the way that perhaps our ancient people did. So, today maybe we're left with again this ignorance in going into some of these undertakings, believing or even feeling a call to return to our roots in that natural sense, but having no guideline to do it. What do you guys think?
I want to jump in. You're pressing all the right buttons for me. Is I think we talked about this the last show, is that often when we don't understand something, the mind, we talked about that with the Christopher Columbus 100 monkey theory, when the mind doesn't understand something, it has no choice but to grab its closest likeness, which can be still very, very skewed. So I'm not one for saying that that is definitely not ancient visitors, that our mind is painting this, oh my God, I just don't know what this is, so I'm afraid. So if I'm afraid, I'm going to make this look like a demon kind of thing, and therefore said thing happens. Is that I would like to offer a different way of seeing these things other than what we know from the Catholic perspective, possession, devil, demons taking over. I've had many demons try to squeeze their way into my being, and it's not fun, and it literally feels like, oh my God, just get out of me, just stop, and it's squishy and icky and all kind of stuff. But the motto I would like to offer is a lot of the times they don't have success in removing devils, demons, minions, whatever it may be, is because they're going about it from a religious point of view when it may not be a religious phenomena at all.
Right.
So what I'm suggesting is that these beings, anything that is not pro-humanity, pro-support, pro-life for anyone and the collective, is an alien or an extraterrestrial being, because the Earth, the terrestrial Earth, was made for the welfare and the explosion and expansion of humanity. So anything outside of this scale is not from here. I think they would have more success if they see this as interdimensional beings that find their way inside of nooks and crannies. So when they try to shake the Bible at this thing, and sometimes it works depending on the conviction of the one doing the shaking. Sometimes they just sit there through the person being possessed and they just laugh their ass off because it doesn't affect them. I think they would have a greater degree of success if they realize that a door is open from an extraterrestrial or a multidimensional being perspective versus Satan, get out of here. It just doesn't work. It doesn't have the tenacity nor the foundation, and basically shut the door. Find a way to shut the door. Sometimes scripture will work because it's really not about the words of scripture. It's about the conviction that comes off of the people who are doing the exorcism. So, I mean, a Catholic priest can literally go into a room with someone who is just flopping on the bed and their head is spinning around and start reading a coloring book with such same fervor and conviction, it would still have the same profound effect.
That actually is kind of my perspective about it. Now, I happen to believe in possession. Now, whether or not they're demons is a totally different story. Coming from a psychological point of view, I think a lot of possessions, probably not all of them, but a lot of possessions can be explained away by dissociative identity disorder. Now, I have a friend of mine who recently experienced that with her friend. She went to go stay with him, and he explained to her that there was some weird stuff going on in the house and that he thinks he may be possessed. She finally left out of fear because he had these different personalities come through, and one of them was extremely violent. And I told her, I said, I'm really kind of glad that you left, because who knows how it could have escalated. Right. You know, and the guy, for all intents and purposes, I know him too. He seems like a pretty normal, up and up guy. But yeah, I mean, I personally think, coming from a psychological standpoint, that I think DID may have a lot to do with it. I'm kind of interested to hear what you might think about that, Wild.
Yeah, definitely. Well, okay, so I definitely think there's some medical explanations for what's going on, and perhaps a lot of it is intense stress as well. But you know, what's interesting is, like, once you buy into one kind of crazy, I don't want to say crazy, you buy into one idea that's like really radical and breaks what consensus reality is. Like, let's say you just believe that there are non-humans on this planet that have technology, you know, so far advanced. You know, if you just believe that one thing, then a lot of other things you kind of makes it easier to believe. For instance, the idea that, you know, these non-humans can communicate with you telepathically. That seems to happen a lot. So then it's not too much of a jump to believe that some of these non-human entities could also possess someone or, you know, inhabit someone's body. It's not that big of a jump. But I do think there are multiple explanations for possessions. You know, I do think some of them have a more mundane explanation and some of them have a more exotic explanation. I think the real trick is finding out which is which. And I mean, when it comes down to possessions, I think the real core of the issue is helping people and what is the best way to help people and how can you do that without causing further problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
and
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say to further what I'd mentioned a little bit earlier. Let's take a look at possession in another culture. For example, Haitian voodoo.
Right.
I'm looking at that specifically because that's pretty much what I've studied in the way of voodoo. But you know, it's not uncommon for people to become quote unquote possessed and then have to go through some sort of ritual to rid themselves of this affliction. That being said, let's talk about Baptist churches, okay? Or any churches, you know, where there's this heavy influence of music and energy that runs through where people lose their minds and fall on the floor, you know, kicking and screaming. Now, are these energies or possessions more of an actual full possession of the body the way we're thinking, or is it more of an influence that may come and go with different variables at the helm? I'm curious because we see this in this phenomenon of what we call possession throughout many cultures, and it's been, you know, recorded for many years too. Of course, going back, you know, skipping over the Catholic interpretation of it, it's been recorded in many other subcultures again throughout time. So my question here really is, again, are these full possessions, or are we sort of just kind of licking that cube of salt for a moment and getting that taste of whatever energy is a little bit alien to us at that moment? Again, keeping in mind the way that people act in churches and, you know, Haitian voodoo as an example.
Well, yeah. And the other thing too is that, I mean, it seems to me that every possession that I've ever heard of is based on somebody who is religious. They believe in demons, you know,
Right.
regardless if they're Christian or not, but they do believe in demons. I've never heard of a Buddhist, for example, being possessed. I've certainly never heard of an atheist being possessed. Ralph, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, because you're atheist.
Right. But I don't think of it as the demon possessing somebody. I think of it more as a bad spirit, more of a spirit, not demons and angels fighting inside of you.
So you believe it could be somebody who's passed on who happened to be particularly bad.
Right.
Okay,
right.
I see. Yeah.
Which is interesting and something I'll address when we talk about Maurice Theriault.
I would like to echo and also take into another level, another street, that DarkHour just said. When we look at certain religious institutions, installments, when it comes to people who are truly being possessed, if such a thing is real, I think it's real. I think there are very far few cases. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. We all get possessed. We're all influenced by the negative energy. Frick, look out in the world. I think a lot of people are not necessarily possessed, but there is a consciousness that is of a great influence, that when we go unconscious, we just meet up with it and say, hey, how you doing? Remember me? And we play together, and it's not so fun. Mm-hmm. But the people who are influenced by said churches, and they go in there and, like you said earlier, Ralph, it's disassociation. I don't want no part in taking responsibility of my own folly and nonsense. And so they call the church member up to the podium and they casting the demon out to the best they could. I think that a lot of those churches, if you have to be called up and you stomping in front of people, it's just for pomp and show. I don't think there's anything really happening there except a big illusion and delusion, not only to, I'm not saying that the ministry itself is doing this on purpose to manipulate people. He believes it just as well. The whole congregation is lost in this riddle. So I think the people who are truly having influence in our life so much so that it actually wants to seat itself is simply a vibration of a door that's open, and they simply just don't know how to shut it.
Yeah, I kind of wonder how much, as much as the church, especially the Catholic Church, likes to disassociate themselves with possession and that sort of thing. And in fact, they've gotten rid of a lot of their exorcists. I almost want to say that, like you said, they do it for pomp and show, you know, I mean, but I think that rings especially true in the sects of Christianity, such as, you know, Baptist churches and that sort of thing, evangelicals, that sort of thing. But yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Keith.
You know what's interesting, very quickly here, I have a friend who has been working with the Archbishop of the Catholic Church for many years, doing these possession cases. And when I first met him, it was about 10 years ago. And as far as I know, he had been doing it for some time before. He's been doing it since. And he told me that essentially what happens is it's the most extreme cases that come to the table, and they're incredibly hush-hush, and they're very quietly slipped over to him. And he's the first one who will arrive at that case and then make an assessment and then report to the Archbishop to decide whether there needs to be a higher level of involvement. So again, this is coming right from, you know, the modern way of people are you know, going about these possession cases. And again, this is sort of from the horse's mouth, just something of note that's interesting.
I want to say to Billy, in our panel tonight, and I want to say thank you for joining us, and very much a pleasure to meet you, sir. That, at least for me, there's no way I'm denouncing whatsoever that you had something of an experience to an extreme level. So I just want you to know that. We're all just trying to figure this not out, but figure it in, to understand the possibility of said things that we're all still grappling with. I mean, we're grappling with the world all the time, but right now, I think personally, I think right now is a time for spirituality, not spiritual warfare. People think that demons and angels are fighting in the heavens. I don't buy into it. You know, if you take a flashlight and you shine in a dark room, sort of like this, the darkness just dissipates. But on these different levels that we don't understand, I think this is all being revealed. So I want to let you know that no one is trying, definitely not me, trying to doubt what you had that is very real for you.
Right.
I've had them myself, and it's not fun.
Yeah, and I got to say, you know, I'm not a particularly religious person. Ralph is, like I said, he's an atheist, and I don't want to down anybody's religious beliefs. I just think, coming from a scientific point of view, I think that a lot of possessions can be attributed to, like I said, dissociative identity disorder and that sort of thing. But like I said, that's not to say that I don't believe in spiritual or demonic possession of some sort, you know. But yeah, I think that a lot of these cases can be explained away by that. What do you think?
Do you think that it's because of someone who's raised religious, so it's a mental thing?
Well, I think it's ingrained in their mind that there are demons and angels and that sort of thing. So I think that you know,
so it's a psychological thing, not a actual.
Well, that depends on how you look at it. I mean, if you have,
I think the psychological could be that which opens the door. So it doesn't really, in my thought, is you don't have to be a religious person that when something of said nature goes down for you, if it does, that you're not going to see demons, or the opposite. Because even if you're an atheist or someone who has not followed a religious way, even so, since you were raised and born to the age that something happens to you, what is the first thing that the mind associates with the ultimate bad? The mythological demon. So the mind says, that's my target, let's go there, because anything beyond this level of understanding, I'm not there yet. So let me grab the nearest likeness to it and bring it in your experience and give you a whole bunch of it. And, you know, something's definitely going down for people like Billy and anyone else who's had said experiences. But I think there's a lot of other things behind it.
That being said, I'd like to hear what Billy has to say about this.
Dig that.
He's on mute.
Billy, you're on mute.
I love it.
There we go.
One other thing, like you said about a congregation, I've been to apostolic Pentecostal churches, and the preacher will start doing what I call singing. He gets real fired up. He's dancing around, hallelujah, hands raised, and like you said, people just bust out. They all line up to go down there, and they put their hands on their head. They fall out. A mental state. I think it's a controlled mental state, if you will. About the psychological disorders, I've read and I believe that multiple personalities do contribute to what some people call demonic possession. It would be easy to pass it off as that instead of admit, hey, I have a mental issue. My deal is, I told one of y'all that I was born dead. I had no oxygen in my body. They had to do a blood transfusion. I spent forever in a NICU. This has been a part of my life since the beginning. My mom has told me stories about dark figures going in and out of my bedroom, moving from a house because of it. I can see and hear and experience things most people don't even know that are around. For whatever reason, this first situation brought about the rest. Even to this day, it's been 29 years, and I can still see and notice things and people. I'll see somebody and nobody else knows they're there and they just disappear. So I'm not saying it's not a psychological in a lot of ways. I am saying there are some people out there that it's really a tie to something. You may not be able to explain it in a way that would make people understand. But I haven't had the issue happen before. But as the one said, I've had attempts. But I also taught myself how to stop it. And I have a 7-year-old that has the same condition. She sees the same things, hears the same things. So, like I said, something's going on. Whether you can give a scientific, a paranormal, I don't know.
Wild Trees, what are your thoughts on perhaps some of this energy actually transposing onto our kids and perhaps other family members as the generations go through? I know this is something that Billy mentioned as sort of, maybe a throwaway bit of information that the hospital was talking about based on the area that he was in. Then I understand that entirely. But everywhere I turn, there seems to be some sort of connection with possession and family, whether somebody else like a father or a mother, someone before this person had issues, or a grandfather. And then, of course, I've also talked to people who've had these experiences and have made very serious life decisions based on that, saying, well, I don't want to take the risk of perhaps bringing this on to my children if I bring kids into this world. Well, Trees, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, I want to say Billy answered a question I was going to ask him. I was going to ask him if he's ever had other paranormal things going on, and so he answered it. He has had other paranormal things going on, so I think that's significant. We shouldn't overlook the fact that seems to be one part of a larger story in Billy's life of paranormal things happening. And then he also mentioned his 7-year-old is having similar things, which is what you asked me about, Michael. Well, when I think about family members, especially children having similar issues, it reminds me of like UFO abductions. They seem to run in families, perhaps for a different reason. Michael, you also mentioned, like, do I think these energies and these abilities, perhaps they pass on? I do think there is a connection with family. It could be genetic as well, because, it could be that, like, these energies or these weird manifestations are maybe caused by the individual themselves. So it could be that genetically, physiologically, like their body has something different that creates these energies themselves. And so that could be passed down genetically as well. But I think with all paranormal things, I think there is a connection with family, especially with children and parents. Yeah.
Wild. Since we're on the subject of the science end of it, I'm kind of curious what you think about the times when people who are possessed display like superhuman powers. Like Billy, he was saying that he was chased at like something like 20 miles an hour, and he was running that fast. And I don't know if he mentioned that. I don't remember if he mentioned this here, but had told me that he picked up a block engine and threw it at his dad. Do you think that that can all be attributed maybe to adrenaline? I mean, it seems to me that, I mean, I've heard of people that have adrenaline rushes. You hear the stories about a woman who will pick up a car to save her child and that sort of thing. But this is something different. This is something more sustained than that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the first thing I would think about would be adrenaline. During really extreme states, the human body can be very surprising as far as what could it do. But as you mentioned, there is a limit. It could only go so far. I guess from a scientific perspective, this is what should probably be done in these cases to get to the core of the issue. Like for Billy, for example, we should I could probably do an analysis. I just need a couple of numbers. Like if you could tell me the engine block he picked up, kind of the model number, something. I just need to find out how much it weighs, basically. And then if I could find out, Billy's height and his weight, I would need that as well. And then if I could have an estimate of the distance, then I could use simple physics equations to see if physically it's possible, without extra force, because that's a simple physics problem, So if I had some data, or in other similar cases, if we had those raw numbers, we could just calculate an equation and we could say, yes, it's barely possible, but it is possible. Or we could definitively say, you know what, that's not possible without an extra added force, without an extra variable. It wouldn't be possible. Yeah.
I would like to say that I think we can all agree that adrenaline is the pharmaceutical, the chemical that allows or is the gateway or the pathway for strength. So whether the person is being influenced by a mindset or someone in a church that's triggering such inner turmoil, of course is going to secrete adrenaline and they're going to become superhuman. Or if there is someone who is the energy consciousness itself of anger. I mean, think about it. When we as humans get angry, I'm upset at my ex. My God, you want to pick up that block and throw it. So my thought is that adrenaline, either way, that it may be explained by science or truth by religion, that there's, the adrenaline definitely has to be a factor in it, because we're still looking at things from the pit of anger as well as we do from the heart of love, which is the two extremes of power.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up, Keith. But my question about adrenaline, is there any documentation that has proven that it has made people physically stronger? My understanding is that the muscle itself can only sustain so much force before it will actually tear. And I don't know if there's something about adrenaline that would actually cause it to be stronger in any way, shape, or form. And if that isn't the case, that we don't have actual documentation, or more or less under the umbrella of supposition, is it possible that each time something like that happens, we are actually assisted in an external spiritual sense? We've heard many stories of people saying, well, I had this superhuman strength, but I also felt like somebody was behind me in a time of trauma or something along those lines. What do you guys think?
Fantastic question, bro. What do you guys think? I'll give a quick answer. I love it. Thank you for the honest question that, gives me an opportunity to get outside of my box. I think that really, in the negative polarity, that the adrenaline idea you pose is probably true, because I'm not very well endowed like trees, or maybe even you or anyone on this panel, that, I just use the word adrenaline as the chemical, the pharmaceutical. I would bet either way, whether the muscles are about to disporphyriate or explode, that there has a level. But there is some other energy happening that bypasses such deterioration. In fact, I watched a video about on Sadhguru yesterday, about the power of Bruce Lee. Of course, this is on the positive pole. There was someone who was standing before Bruce Lee, and he was about to do a demonstration. And there was a swimming pool 9 feet behind the person he's about to do this demonstration on, which was the 3-inch punch. And he literally lofted this guy off of his feet and threw him into the swimming pool. So I understand that the positivity would only support the muscle mass. So I don't doubt that there's something happening on another level that surpasses the human meat suit, that is another current that allows us such thing to pass without disporphyration or whatever it is of the body.
Yeah, but that's the kind of situation. I mean, that's a learned skill to be able to do something like that, like
Right.
Bruce Lee did. But
Sure.
when it comes to people who are claiming possession, I mean, these are people who have no knowledge of that sort of thing. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I think that it has to be adrenaline because, like you said, it's something that people don't normally do, and it's not something they've learned by going to learn to punch somebody that way and throw them 9 feet. So yeah, I think it would have to be adrenaline.
Yeah, and referring to what Michael had mentioned was that he said he didn't know if adrenaline has something to do with the fact that people don't tear their muscles doing
Right.
stuff like this. I think that that's very true. That adrenaline certainly does have something to do with that. I mean, you're considering people who, a lot of these people don't really have the muscle mass to be able to do something like that. And certainly adrenaline would have to play a key factor in that.
Well, here's something interesting I just found before we move on to the next thing here. I very quickly just asked Google if adrenaline makes your muscles stronger. And the answer that came back is psychologically, adrenaline boosts breathing and heart rate, flooding our muscles with extra oxygenated blood for more forceful contractions. Nerves from the spinal cord running to our body's muscles are more easily able to recruit motor units, again, harnessing more of a muscle's total strength. So to me, that means that we still can't exceed what the muscle is actually capable of, although adrenaline may bring it to its highest potential. So for a woman who is trapped in a car accident, trying to rescue her kid, picking up a car who weighs 135 pounds, I think there's something else going on here.
Totally agreed. And I also want to add to that, which is, though the muscles may only be able to handle a certain capacity, I think consciousness follows the conduit, rides the energy of adrenaline. But what happens beyond that is not necessarily based in science, as Michael, you were saying earlier. It's not necessarily always based in science of what can happen. That something else begins to engage beyond. In fact, it's not dense at all. It's on such another level. It supersedes and surpasses the damaging effects that can happen to muscles because it's coming from a place of force or source. It's all source, actually. We can call it force or source. It really doesn't matter. Force meaning I'm forcing something upon you, or source, which means I'm forever allowing. It's all the same energy with just a different spin. So there, how can a 135-pound woman pick up a car? Is it really adrenaline? Is it really her muscles? Or is it really her will, which supersedes and surpasses anything that the body can contain in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. I can hear your cat.
She's in heat.
Yeah, I think she's best, actually. Hey, Michael, I want to get over to you, and you had mentioned a story you wanted to bring up.
Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about Maurice Theriault and his case. How many here are familiar with that story? Anyone?
Not at all.
Not at all. Okay, well, I'll give you a little background here as we go through. It's a very large story, all-encompassing, if you will. So Maurice Frenchy Theriault was born to a farm family. Again, I'm going to breeze through this story here just to give you guys the ideas so we can introduce the topics at hand. Long story short, his father was incredibly intimidating and very abusive, verbally, physically, you name it, to his mother and to him. I don't remember if he had a sibling. I don't think he did. And around at the age of 6, 7, or 8, something like that, very, very young, he was so over the abuse that he would take any opportunity he had to, scream in certain ways, I'd rather work for the devil than work for you. Obviously, talking about his father. Now, what ended up happening was it was a short time after, and he was actually very curious about the occult as well. I'm not sure how he learned about that. What happened a short time later is he all of a sudden started garnering this superhuman strength, wherein he was working around the farm, doing the work of 2-3 men. And of course, his father, used that to his advantage, not even questioning the reasons as to why this might be. Such a young man. There was plenty of sexual misconduct, we'll call it, for the sake of conversation, between his father and him. And I think that's a very damaging thing. We find that particular act at the root of a lot of different issues that come up in people's lives immediately and later after the act. And curiously, this seems to be an ongoing theme that I find in demonic possession as well. My thought being, it's possible that it really knocks somebody off of their natural balance, the core identity of who they are, and then weakens them in that way. So it would make sense that we could apply that not only to demonic possession, but to other anomalies that occur within people's personalities as they get older after suffering such trauma. But that being said, so Maurice got worse. He got worse and he got worse. He married a woman named Nancy. They moved out to Warren, Massachusetts, and he continued his farm life. Now, when I say he got worse, I mean he started bleeding from the eyes spontaneously, many different orifices. It wasn't just the eyes, but this was what was witnessed more often than not. There were reports of a doppelganger effect occurring, where he would be standing in the kitchen talking to his wife, and she'd turn around and he wasn't there, and moments later he would walk in the door, something to this effect, where he couldn't have shared the same space because she just saw him literally 1 moment ago. And there were other anomalies that went along with that doppelganger sighting that occurred within this. Okay, so I don't, this is tough. All right, so let me put it this way. All this stuff went on for quite some time, even living in Warren, to the point where the police were called, Warren police, for these incidents where Maurice was, for example, Satan's Harvest, the book written by Ed Warren. It starts off with this scene where the police come to the house on a call from Nancy, and they walk into the bathroom where Maurice is supposed to be laying on the floor unconscious, and they find his body spinning. And as he's spinning, all this blood is just coming off of his face, out of his nose, out of his eyes, out of his mouth. And there's no explanation for this whatsoever. So again, long story short, eventually the Warren police had recommended that he seek treatment for these issues in a mental asylum, which, guess what? He actually did. He went there, I think it was for 3 days, and I can't remember exactly where he ended up going. He eventually went to Worcester State Hospital, which is not far from me, and I've been up on those grounds many times. The clock tower that is original still stands. And he was deemed sane. He went through all the tests. Everything was fine. So he eventually contacted Father Boyer of their local church, and he eventually talked to Robert McKenna, who was another priest. And Robert McKenna was the one who decided that they were going to have to undertake the possession exorcism ritual to get him out of this state. Odd things would happen to him too, wherein cuts would appear on his body. He would speak different languages that, seemed nonsensical. Upside down crosses, here's the religious reference, which is interesting, would appear on his stomach. And these were witnessed by many different people, many times over, especially with his wife. So Robert McKenna decided that, we were going to start with an exorcism, see how it goes. Long story short, once again, it took 3 exorcisms to finally, quote unquote, cure Frenchie of his ailments. Unfortunately, even though he had a slight reprieve, he was also arrested for sexual allegations involving his stepdaughter, I believe it was. And, there's a whole story that goes behind that and how he was making it rain in jail. Blood was still coming out of his orifices, and he was actually very feared amongst the people that were incarcerated with him and that were patrolling in the respect of being an officer. But long story short, once again, he was released, and again, it wasn't very much longer that this influence returned, and he chased his wife out of the house in 1992, shot her, and then shot himself. Now, the interesting thing is that Nancy did survive. So, this is actually a reflection of what ended up happening with his own parents. And this is why it's so hard to gloss over a story like this, because I'm leaving out really important details. But his father eventually lost it one day and killed his mother and himself as well. So it was almost a repeat. And we have seen this in paranormal happenings wherein, something occurs early on in life, and then that person ends up replicating the same thing. And my thought is that his father had some sort of attachment. This man was obviously very evil from the description that's been given. He had some sort of attachment that even while he was alive, it was influencing Maurice because of his weakness and being under the trauma that he was in his domestic life. It was easy enough for us to come in, and he accepted it. And that was a big thing there. He accepted that into his life, whether it was good or it was bad. It didn't matter to him. He just wanted something else to relieve him of the trauma that he was going through. And if that's not exactly what happened, seeing as a lot of the really heavy phenomena started to occur after his father's death, could that energy have been so entwined with what his father was that his father was actually now on him energetically as well, influencing these acts of violence and other vile acts that he was committing? It's a really interesting case, and I understand that there are some people that don't hold a credibility for the Warrens, and I understand those perspectives. We can get into those on another show. And I will say, just for the record, that his sister, who I forget her name at the moment, but she lives in Springfield, Massachusetts, at the time of his death had mentioned he was just an actor. And, I'd seen him putting, blood underneath his eyes to create this effect, and he would just dive into this. Now, this is only one person saying this is the case, even though it's a close family member. We don't really know how close she was to her brother. I guess there's the answer about him having a sibling. Okay, that being said, that's just one account, but who knows how much she actually knew. And his family was very religious. You had that religious connotation back there, which I think in the end really starts to play a part in making this more of a reality, because people already have the basis, the foundation of belief that something like that could affect them, or that they're constantly protecting themselves from outside evil forces, and you have to do that. Well, if something gets in, you've already accepted that it's there, so it might affect you more so out of the ignorance. You know what I mean? I don't think religion, although some of these entities, as it's been mentioned, and I'll turn it over to you guys in a moment here, they do respond to the religious inductions and so forth. There are plenty who don't. And I believe that is because religion as a whole isn't necessarily meant to empower people. It might empower a country, it might empower a frame of mind, but it doesn't empower the individual. So what spirituality does, and principles that have been put forth in the last 40 or 50 years that really hold on to that idea of self-empowerment, is saying, well, you have the power to, dispel these sort of things and keep these experiences out of your life. But there's always a responsibility that comes with that. There's always the consequence or cause and effect that is associated. So, you will have to, do certain things in the realm of healing or diving deep within yourself to execute some of these performances that need to occur if something like that is bothering you. So what are your guys' thoughts on, again, this really
I would like to know Billy's thoughts. Billy, what are your thoughts about all this, and how we are offering different ideas and possibilities of what may be transpiring for you? Does some of this make sense to you, or what is your place in all this, sir?
Unfortunately, it looks like we lost Billy. He's no longer here. So,
well, that being said, God bless Billy. I would like to offer this, and I would like to support and ask, offer up something that DarkHour said. He said something about doppelganger, and there's my cat, and she's right by the microphone. Check her out. Listen, it's beautiful. How you doing, boo-boo? And so, Michael DarkHour had said something about doppelganger or bilocation, and also about religious artifacts showing up and the blood that spontaneously happens. Has anyone ever heard of Padre Pio?
No.
Padre Pio was a Catholic priest times whatever. Lived in Italy, I believe. Kiki, please stop for the moment if you would. Who was able to bilocate. And he had stigmata. So he had all the religious impressions. I mean, his blood would smell like roses or flowers. And he was, anyone can look it up on Google. The Germans back in the World War II days was coming with a squadron to bomb whoever and wherever. And the whole squadron turned around and said, we had to turn around. There was this huge monk in the sky. Padre Pio had stigmata. This is an absolute fact. In fact, if you know anyone who is being possessed and or sick, it has been said, documented. Stop rubbing on my stand. Stop, boo-boo. That the Germans have turned around. Literally have turned around because they saw this figure in the sky. Padre Pio, when he was being brought to bed by his attendants, they would lock the door. Good night, master, teacher, whatever they called him. Padre. As soon as they shut the door, they begin to hear a physical scuffle ensue. That he would go into physical battle. He would wake up in the morning and his eyes were black. His nose were bloodied. And so, because he was physically fighting demons. So what does this mean? Was he physically fighting demons? Well, of course he was. Because he would wake up in the morning with a bloody nose and black eyes. Now, is this really what was transpiring? My mentor and I, many years ago, and I still lean into the possibility that someone of this level of illumination, even though they are beyond the physical, one way to transmute such energy is to physically whip its ass, to physically fight it. So in his level of will and power, so much so that he can have stigmata up until the day he died. That one way that he knew how to combat negativity and transform such energy into a very beautiful possibility. For him, it was to physically fight it. Think about the Catholic religion. And I don't mean Catholicism. So here, please, everyone outside of this panel, here in the context that's being offered, which is he combated in the way he knew how, which is to physically grab hold of it and do what he needed to do. But he would go into physical battle with these demons often.
Yeah, I think it's interesting about the stigmata thing. We were talking about the adrenaline rush to have these kind of superhuman powers. Michael had brought up that one instance with that guy who was spinning around. And then, I don't know that adrenaline can explain something like that or like levitations. But that's the thing that I find most interesting about supposed demonic possession, because how do you explain things like the stigmata, or like the like Billy was saying, he was speaking Latin and he doesn't know Latin. So I don't know how that explains that.
There's certainly an influence there to whatever degree. When it comes to some of these abnormal behaviors, we've also seen this during traumatic injury where somebody hits their head just in the right way and they're all of a sudden a virtuoso on the piano. They now know different languages they didn't know before. They have an accent from some other country that they've never visited. And I mean, these are pretty accurate too. It's not just a speech impediment or something like that. It'll actually line up with some of these other cultures. So it's something interesting to consider in looking at these. I mean, of course, we'd love to know the origin of this energy, because then we could say, oh, well, he's speaking in an ancient, French-esque dialect, so we understand that whatever is possessing him is from this time period. But it doesn't necessarily work like that. In fact, I don't think it's ever worked like that as much as we want it to. So it's interesting to note these different behaviors. And of course, the consistency amongst the cases is really what I always look at. And, different sets of behaviors that are, again, exhibited over and over again. And then hopefully we can put something together to at least be able to identify when somebody is under the influence of a negative entity, or as we call, being possessed.
Yeah. I think we're going to wrap it up here pretty soon. But the last question I want to pose for collectively is about the Warrens, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed Warren was a famous demonologist, and she was a psychic and worked on a lot of these cases, including the Amityville Horror and Annabelle and all of that. And they never believed that any of these places were haunted or that they were hauntings necessarily. They believed that all these spirits were simply demons. Can you guys touch on that?
Well, let me ask you this too, okay? Because they were involved in a lot of different cases that really spanned throughout the entire field of what we know as the paranormal and mysterious. Do these stories of possession and cases of hauntings in certain houses really hinge on the Warrens' credibility alone, or are the stories strong enough to stand without any formal associations? And one of those stories that comes to mind is Annalise Michaels' case.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I get what you're saying, Michael. I don't think it all, we shouldn't hinge so much on the Warrens' credibility as far as the cases. We should, the Warrens' investigation is one aspect of a larger case. So I agree with you there. But also to answer Damien's question, okay, so I'm a scientist, so a lot of times when I hear these outrageous tales, I do a lot of translation, I guess. I think a mistake that a lot of scientists do is they hear a story and they as soon as they hear it, it sounds ridiculous, so they just dismiss it completely, and they get this I'm so better than everybody attitude. But a lot of times I hear these stories and I'm like, okay, I have to translate it into science terms that I could understand. So I guess what I'm saying, so the way that relates to the Warrens and them thinking it's demons, okay. So nobody truly knows what's going on with this paranormal stuff. We have our best guesses. And I do think that in the future, I think that all this paranormal stuff will be mundane. I do think in the future, this will be like normal stuff. It won't be weird. I do think there will be other stuff that's even weirder. But what we consider paranormal today, I think will become commonplace. But as of today, we don't know what's going on. So really, a lot of what we do know, perhaps, is we know what works. Because of trial and error, we know what works a lot of times with these problems, but we don't necessarily know why it works. So someone like the Warrens, I'm just guessing, this is just a guess. Perhaps for them, it works for them to consider everything to be demons, because they have a set, methodology. They have things they could do to solve those problems. And so by them just believing everything is demons, it simplifies their process. And as long as they were getting results, then it didn't really matter to them. They were more results driven. So yeah, personally, I don't think it was all demons. But perhaps if it helps simplify their process to think it was demons, and if their methods worked, then it was working for them.
That's a fantastic response. And before we exit, I would like to leave with this: the same as DarkHour and we all have been talking about. How can adrenaline be used to such a force that it doesn't disintegrate the muscle tissue? I think the same question or the same idea is, how can a Catholic priest read the Bible or a Dr. Seuss book and exorcise the same demons? So that being said, there is a force beyond our understanding, which is the adrenaline and the muscles, and someone reading the Bible or whatever scripture that would help to cast out said demons. So my question simply becomes, what is that place? That is where, as Trees just said, there's something we don't understand scientifically or spiritually. And that place is where I think the garden is, which is all knowledge.
I tend to agree. And, Wild Trees was saying that this is eventually going to get to the point where the paranormal is accepted. And I think we're getting there, actually. We're not too far away from that point where it's pretty much universally accepted, whether we're talking about ghosts or demons or UFOs or what have you. But I think we are definitely getting there.
I think that's this is all a process, and it has to happen naturally, in order not to shock people out of whatever evolution that, we are on in terms of a path. Again, I think this is something that many cultures have gone through, and I'd say cultures, I actually mean species, because I think that there have been many species of what we might consider to have human form here on this planet that have undergone similar evolutions. I mean, it's a matter of climbing up through this third dimension, which is disharmonious. Fourth dimension is harmonious. Fifth is supposedly more disharmonious, and so forth. It goes back and forth. But, you know, it's interesting to see these cases, and I can't but let my heart go out to those who've experienced some of these awful, traumatic, life-changing events. And I really appreciate Billy coming on for as long as he did and talking to us for a little bit. It takes a lot of courage to come out and say something like that.
Lots of courage. Lots of courage.
Yeah, he had this experience that affected him for the rest of his life. And it only took a very short period of time, wherein some people will make the choice to ruin the rest of their lives doing something scrupulous. He was under a different sort of control, or didn't feel like he had that control. And that's scary. I think that's probably the most frightening aspect of this for me, is that you would lose control in some respect, shape, or form. I mean, listen, I don't even like to get blackout drunk like some people enjoy, because you don't know what's going to happen and you don't remember what happened.
That in and of itself is the demon. It's the demon, right? And we all have our demons.
Form, yeah, absolutely. But again, thank you guys for having me on. This was another fantastic show, and it was a great topic that everybody contributed to. Great job, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all for being here. Folks, if you just joined us or joined us midway through this, unfortunately, we lost Billy. He lost his connection or something like that. But
he said he had to. He wrote a note. He said his kids were calling, so he had to.
Was that what happened? Okay. Anyway, once this is over, viewers, definitely go back to the beginning of this episode and listen to his story. It's pretty fascinating. But anyway, I think we are going to get out of here for the night. Folks, thanks a lot for watching. And guys, it's always a pleasure to have you on. You guys are very interesting to talk to.
Always.
Viewers,
it's a beautiful mess. Can I make a quick announcement? Everyone in the listening audience, thank you, Damon. Thank you, Ralph. I recently on Center of Light Radio interviewed Damien and Ralph. I took a break and I'm coming back, and I want to announce that on February 9th, I'm going to be interviewing Wild Trees, dear Lord. We are going to settle on what we're going to be talking about soon. As well as the 16th, I'm going to be interviewing DarkHour. So,
nice.
Awesome.
centeroflightradio.com. So, there you go.
Yeah, definitely check out his video channel. We've got a link for that down in the description. Folks, again, don't forget to like and subscribe to our videos, and make sure you hit that little bell so you're reminded every time we're going to do a new live roundtable thing, and definitely share it. If you've got friends of yours that are into this stuff, into the paranormal and stuff like that, definitely share it with them, and I'm sure they would enjoy it too. I know that some of these people in the chat room I know that they're personally involved with groups at Facebook. Definitely share it to there too if you can. But anyway, thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this panel. Thank you.
Question everything. Even Keith's cat.